prisoners are starting to die, close to about 100 per day. And as a guard on the tower, you've got pretty much a bird's eye view of the conditions you see below you. This particular guard was moved in a very special way that made him express his emotions and feelings through written word. He didn't know how it was going to be accepted with him just being a private in the ranks.
Watched a man get shot last night, right near my sentry station. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. There's one or two shot nearly every day. This one, he was right near his tent, shot through the bows. Commanding officer came over. Sentry told him, he was across the line. You see, there's a space between the walls of the stockade. It's nearly 12 feet across. They call it the dead line. Any man who crosses it, of course, is shot dead. Hence the name. My apologies. My name is James Anderson, Private, 1st Georgia Reserves. Although I'm not from this place. I don't know anyone who would say they were from this place. You see, I have no love for the Yankees. What they did to me and my family in Louisiana. And since that day 2 years ago, I have done nothing but to seek revenge for all of them. And therein lies the rub. How many of you have ever questioned what it means to be a human? Anybody? What does being a human mean to you? That's what I keep asking myself. As nightly I serve my time high on that wall, making sure that nobody escapes. So what is it? What does it mean to be human? If you know, please tell me. This whole time, I spent 2 years trying to enact my revenge on the Yankees. The fruits of my efforts are right inside those walls. Don't get me wrong, I do not want to see a single one of those men turn loose back into the wild, as it were. But how can I call myself a human seeking revenge and allow those men to live as they do inside those walls? That's the question I keep asking myself night after night after watching men get shot 2 nights ago. A sentry took out 2 men with 1 shot while they slept in their tent. And again, the sergeant asked the sentry, well, what had happened? They crossed the line, Sarge. Good job, soldier. What am I to do? I'm but a private in the ranks. It's occurred to me, as I sit here trying to put my thoughts on paper, that perhaps one of those men inside those walls, he's thinking the same things. From a little bit different perspective, it occurred to me last night that when I was a young boy, I attended a one-room schoolhouse with my siblings and all those in the area. Our school marm, she used to teach us words from the Bible, or words from those of William Shakespeare. She would recite line by line, and we would all have to repeat right back to her. I always wondered, what is the purpose? Why do we need to know this? And then last night, one of those recitations came back to my head. Only this time, the words weren't of the schoolmarm or of the bard. The words were one of those Yankees inside that wall, sleeping in his tent, hoping that he's not the one that gets shot through the bowels tonight by a sentry like me. Perhaps, and if you'll excuse my version taken from Shakespeare, perhaps that soldier's name is Shylock. Why, to bait fish withal, if it will feed nothing, it will feed my revenge. He hath hindered me and squandered me of 500,000, mocked at my gains, laughed at my losses, scorned my nation, cooled my friends, and heated my enemies. And why? What is his reason? Oh, that I am a Yank. Well, hath not a Yank eyes? Hath not a Yank hands? Organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the very same weapons, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer that a Confederate is? Why, if you were to prick us, would we not bleed? If you poison us, do we not die? Well then, if we are like you in all the rest, we shall resemble you in that if a Yank harm or wrong a Confederate, what is his humility? Revenge. Well then, if a Yank is wronged by a Confederate, what should his humility be? Why, revenge. See, the villainy you teach me, gentlemen, I will execute. And it will go hard. But I will better the instruction. There's a man in a tent tonight afraid that a sentry is going to shoot him because he thinks, as a young man or an old man, whoever that sentry might be, that killing a Yank makes him a man. He got his revenge. And I sit here saying, how can I call myself a human? With human emotions, revenge is certainly one of those. But I've been so focused on it that this is the fruits of my humanity. Camp Sumter. Men living worse than the hogs in the woods. Treated worse than a squirrel being hunted out of the trees. And what is my recourse? I am but a private in the ranks. The only man who can do something about this is President Davis. But how is he to listen to a man like me? A private, with nothing but pencil and paper. And what if I were to write to the president and say, Mr. President, you must come and witness these conditions? President Davis would arrive with a great welcoming. They would probably parade our entire unit out to the gates to welcome him. And they would show him the best of the best conditions. I bet you the rations would approve that day. he wouldn't see the depravities of human life that go on day in and day out on the inside of those walls. And if I were to beg him to send an emissary of his office to walk amongst these men as a civilian, or as a sentry or a guard, if they were not to see the depravities that I have seen, then I should deserve whatever could come my way should my report be given to my commanding officers here at Camp Sumter. You think perhaps if I wrote that letter and I asked him to excuse the use of pencil, he'd listen? Thank you. My name is... My name is Stephan Zacharias. I am a living history and cultural interpretation professional. Currently, I work at the Georgia Museum of Agriculture and Historic Village down the road in Tifton, Georgia. And I do want to thank Jake Cook, the lead interpretive ranger here at Andersonville National Historic Site, and all the NPS for asking me to come up this weekend and giving me the opportunity to be here. The presentation you saw was based upon a letter that Private James Anderson wrote to Jefferson Davis in June of 1864. Respected sir, being but a private in the ranks. And then he continues, describing all the different things that he has witnessed in his time here. And he says, I have no love for the Yankee, but I expect things to be done unto others as they are done unto me. And even prisoners deserve some respect. He asks again at the end, after describing all the different incidences that he's witnessed of men being killed well within their part of the camp, not within the actual deadline. He asks at the very end, please do not inform my superiors of all that's contained in this letter, for the simple fact I'm afraid of what the repercussions might be. And then at the very end, respectfully yours, P.S., please excuse the use of pencil. We know that that letter makes it to Jefferson Davis. He then refers it on to the Secretary of War, who then sends it on to the Attorney General of the Confederacy, who then makes the decision to take that letter and send it right back to the commanding officer of Camp Sumter. I'm still on the hunt. I had a short amount of time when this letter was presented to me, asked if I could do something with it. What you just saw was what I did with it. That letter and his name, I used to hunt him down to see what happens next. And to this date, I've been unable to locate his pension record or his death certificate. So while we know he wrote the letter in June of 1864, and we know the letter makes its rounds all the way back to here, we don't know what happened next. Use your imagination. Yes, he was probably punished. I can't prove that. He was afraid of it. That's why he mentions it in the last line. But who knows what happened to him next. I do want to mention in a moment, the slideshow will keep going. Not only am I here as a guest of the National Park Service upon their request, I'm also here because of two men. In the bottom left-hand corner of this image, you're going to see a colored photo, and that is my grandfather, who was killed in action in 1966 in the central highlands of Vietnam. Staff Sergeant David Paul Spears. His great-grandfather was Harmon Lawson, a private in the Tennessee Regiment. And in September of 1864, on or about the 16th of September, Private Lawson died of scurvy on the other side of those walls here at Andersonville National Historic Site, and he's buried in row H out there at the prison site. So I'm also here because of those two men. If anybody has any questions about anything they just saw, about anything that was presented, now is the time for us to have a little conversation. So feel free to ask. Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to ask, but I want to. Have you looked for his wife in her pension records?
I have. I've looked for anything associated with his pension. And when you search the National Archives, the pension records for that soldier will show up. Like if a brother applies, or a wife or daughter, son applies. And so far, you sent this to me in January, I think?
January.
Yeah.
Late January.
So I've only had a short amount of time, so I'm not done finding out what happened to this guy. One day I will, I just haven't so far.
There's something I'll throw in while you're waiting on other questions. He asked about what's next. I don't know if it's directly involved with that letter, but the Confederate government did send people down to inspect here. Actually, one of them, I forget his name, he was a colonel, I believe. His testimony is part of the Wirtz trial, and it's not very pleasant towards Wirtz. So in a way, the Confederate government inspection is what helps Wirtz become executed following the war.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, how many years did they have this prison
Was it
here?
14 months.
14 months? Yeah.
13,000 died, 14
14.
months.
What year when was the arrival of the first prisoners?
February 24th of 1864.
Yeah, so that was February when they arrived. Private Anderson's writing his letter in June. Things had gotten that bad from February to June that he's writing his account.
Some background on the prison. It's built to hold 10,000. By early August, there's 26,000 men inside the 16-acre compound. It's so crowded, they add another 10 or 12 acres on to this side of the prison. At its height, there were 33,000 men inside.
So that's
That's
the highest
nice.
number that they know of that was inside?
45,000 total men passed through, but yeah, 33,000
At
is the
one
highest
time.
number at one time.
Wow.
And that man was one of them. Any other questions?
Was
Yes,
the
ma'am.
reason for closing the prison that the war was over?
Not that the war was over, there was a fear. We have this guy from Ohio who's coming down through Atlanta, Sherman, and they're afraid that, they're going to free the prisoners and they'll add to their army. So the idea is to get them out and get them to other locations. A lot of prisoners in South Carolina, Florence.
Yeah, a lot are sent
Yeah.
There's only one real attempt to actually free the prisoners here. It's a cavalry raid. Unfortunately for those cavalrymen, they're met by a larger Confederate force near Macon, and most of those cavalrymen end up here as prisoners, not as liberators. But yeah, once Sherman campaign begins, they try to send a lot of the prisoners off to different areas. The prison's still in existence until April of 1865, but much lower number, 5,000 or less, and mostly it's the men that were too sick to send on. Actually, I have a third grade uncle that was a prisoner here as well, that's buried back a little bit farther in the same section his is, and he was just too sick, so they didn't send him on. He dies in December of 64.
So did they bury the Yankee prisoners here?
They did, yeah. The National Cemetery originally forms around those almost 13,000 prisoners. You can tell the Civil War burials, just like in the picture there, the headstones are very close together because they're buried in mass graves. They're not in coffins. And the more modern burials are just like you see in any other national cemetery. There's 3 feet or so between headstones.
What does the number indicate on the road?
When they originally buried the men, they didn't put headstones up, but they put numbered stakes, and they had a list the list of the dead that they kept. It's a really interesting story, actually. Dorrance Atwater, who's one of the prisoners, is paroled to serve as a clerk. And so he keeps the list of the dead. Well, he thinks halfway through there may be some sort of cover-up because the list of the dead keeps growing and growing. He actually secretly makes a copy, and when he's paroled at the end of the war, he takes it to Washington to give it to the government. He wants it published in a newspaper to try to give some families, if they don't know what happened to their loved one, closure. The government takes it, but they don't want to publish it for whatever reason. So he steals the list from the government and has it published in a New York paper, and they actually try him for grand larceny for trying to steal this. That all gets worked out. He comes down here with a military expedition in the summer of 1865. Clara Barton is also involved with that, the founder of the Red Cross. But he has that list, and they put headstones over all the graves. So we're rather unique here. At the time of the Civil War, they didn't have ID tags, dog tags, anything like that. Actually, the first government to have those is the Prussian government. So the Franco-Prussian War, about 6 years later, they have ID tags, but not for the Civil War. Out of the 12,900 and some prisoners that die here, only a few hundred are unknown because of the records they kept. And to the Confederates' credit, they did not destroy the records. They were here when the Union Army comes following the war. As a reverse to that, the last park I worked at Vicksburg National Military Park for the last 7 years. There's 17,000 Union soldiers there, 13,000 are unknown. So it's very unique to have as many of these men identified as we do.
Well, I don't want anybody to miss the opportunity to join the 1:30 Ranger Talk outside. I will be sticking around if you have any further questions, want to talk to me one-on-one. Otherwise, thank you all. Thank you guys from the National Park Service as well. Appreciate it.